There we go. I am recording. And let me start my presentation. Here we go. As you know, when I talk about a particular artist, and my most favorite artists are the kind of artists that either revolutionized their field, stood out in any way from what was going on in the art world at that time, or maybe were, in a way, the quintessential, the best example of what was going on in art at that time. And as most of you probably know, Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio is an Italian artist, and he lived at the end of the 16th century, the very beginning of the 17th century. Around that time, in Italy, which obviously is the cradle of the Catholic Church, one of the major moods when it came to religion was that Catholicism felt, in a way, threatened by Protestantism that was gaining more and more popularity, more and more power, and kind of bringing back the power to the Catholic Church and restating why it is so wonderful was at the core of what was going on in the Catholic Church at that time, and of course by proxy in Italy as well, because as I said, Italy is the cradle of the Catholic Church, and Rome being even more of a center of it. And one of the solutions that the art world offers to this problem is the school of art that is known as Mannerism. Mannerism did not exist for a very long time, and this is a style or a movement in art that rests in between Renaissance and Baroque. Here on my screen, you can see one of the examples of Mannerism. In my opinion, one of the most illustrative examples. And to me personally, when I think of Mannerism, I think of taking Renaissance painting and adding a little bit more decor to it, and adding a little bit more movement and a little bit more passion to it. However, most art historians believe that one thing that art is starting to lose during this period is that deep meaning or deep revelation. For example, as you can see here on the screen, this is a depiction of Virgin Mary with infant Christ. And when I look at her face as she is looking at her son, yes, I do see a certain motherly feeling, but partially because of the way she is dressed, partially because of the background in which she is depicted, I don't feel either the same divine presence that I would feel when I look at some of the Renaissance paintings. At the same time, I can't really say that I see a lot of passion in this piece either. It does feel very decorative, and to add a little bit more frills to religious paintings, in a way, was one of those strategies that was used by the Catholic Church to show again the beauty of this religion. So this is sort of the setting in which Caravaggio comes in when he moves to Rome, and we will be talking a lot about his art works that are in Rome. Our story actually starts in Milan, which is where he started his career as an apprentice. And it was already in Milan at the very beginning of his career that he starts showing his character in a way. If you know anything about his personality and his life, one thing we know about him is that he had quite a temper. He was pretty aggressive, and he was easily irritated. And even as a young man, as an artist's apprentice, he already started getting into fights, often violent ones. And Caravaggio's career in Milan was not very long because, according to most of his biographers, he had to run away from Milan because he got in trouble with the police as a result of one of the fights. So he finds his way in Rome, which actually benefits his career. And as he is still quite a young artist, a way for him to get established in Rome is to start working for an artist workshop. And an artist that he starts working for is a quintessential Mannerist. And basically what Caravaggio did for his boss was mostly painting depictions of fruits and other kinds of still lifes. You know, I love still life. You know, we talk a lot about many different still lifes through the course of my art history talks. And when you think about a still life, especially as you already can imagine what mannerism thinks of a still life. Yeah, you imagine a beautiful basket of fruit, a celebration of the abundance of life. Well, very soon, uh, after he moved to Rome, Caravaggio produces this masterpiece that is known as Basket of Fruit. What could be more beautiful? What could be more desirable, right? But Caravaggio, to quote my favorite author who writes about him, Simon Schama, whose book I highly recommend, he turns this into a whole philosophical study on the nature of life. I'm giving you this link from Google Arts and Culture, another website that I really like because you can really zoom in and see the details in the pictures. So this basket of fruit here shows some fruit that are just at the height of their ripeness. For example, the pear here on the left. But at the same time, it also shows the fruit and the leaves that are starting to get over ripening and starting to die. For example, I would say that this apple, for me personally, this is what attracts my eye first when I look at the painting, and I think it is true for most other people. And you can see at the very center of this gorgeous apple, you can see that it is starting to rot. Same happens with the leaves here and some of the grapes on the left. And all of this is positioned against a completely plain background, really standing out and really making us think of this, finite nature of life. Despite the fact that Caravaggio painted this picture in Rome, this is one of the few pieces that you can actually still see in Milan, in one of the libraries. And just for our own enjoyment, I want to show you the gorgeous setting in which this rather small painting, here it is right here, is displayed. So it is a library. And here you can see a collection of different paintings and artifacts, along with a wonderful collection of books in Italian, in Latin, and in Greek. I think it is absolutely wonderful. So, as you can imagine, and as you can hear, soon after Caravaggio moves to Rome, he already starts moving away from these standards of mannerism. Already early in his career, he starts adding a little bit too much of real life into his paintings. But Turns out the people in Rome absolutely love it. And you know, the paintings that Caravaggio creates around that time combine kind of like the two worlds in which he lives. At work, he paints masterpieces for um, mostly, rich Italian aristocrats to decorate their palazzos. He's starting to work with the church as well. So he's starting, seeing and creating pictures of different things. And he is this very close proximity to the cultural elite of the country. At the same time, he also, as an artist, a rather poor one, experiences the whole other side of the life in Rome. Together with other artists, he lives in quite modest and often dirty places. He goes out to bars and taverns at night. He knows, of course, people like prostitutes. He knows of people who can rip you off on the street, like fortune tellers or any other sort of indecent people. And he becomes the person who, for the people of Rome around that time, is able to combine both of these worlds in his amazing masterpieces. The first piece that I want to show you that combines these two worlds and sort of like mocks the art tradition of the time as well. It's called Young Sick Bacchus. It's believed to be a self-portrait of Caravaggio. And, according to ancient mythology, Bacchus was the god of wine, was the god of fun. And oftentimes, Bacchus is depicted as a young man, yes, often holding a grapevine, a glass of wine, often in the other hand. It's just like calling you to celebrate with him. And of course, in art academies, art schools, art workshops around that time, depicting ancient Roman, ancient Greek gods was a very essential part of the curriculum. And young artists were copying those ancient masterpieces. And here Caravaggio really makes a mockery of those ancient pieces because he depicts Bacchus the day after a celebration. That's why it's called Sick Bacchus. And you can really see how sick he is on his face. The face itself looks pale. The lips look blue. And just as Bacchus looks sick, so do the grapes that he's holding in his hand. You can see that they're also starting to rot. And the hands holding the grapes itself, they are not the hands of a Greek god. If you look at the thumb right here, you can see a really, really filthy fingernail holding the thumb. So, this is not the kind of grapes that you would like to taste, and definitely not out of these filthy hands. Again, just absolutely making fun of this Greek god. Another wonderful combination of the both worlds, as I mentioned, comes in depicting not an ancient god, but situation from real life. In this piece, that is called the fortune teller. Now, this is what the studies of small Dutch artists would call a genre scene. So what we can see here is a young, innocent man, clearly quite wealthy based on his beautiful clothes, the feather in his hat, next to a young, beautiful fortune teller who is looking him in the eyes and in the meantime sliding an expensive ring off of his fingers. So he starts to create these very playful observations of life around him, his life as an artist, living in these not as well off parts of Rome. But the painting that brings him true fame is this one called Card Sharks. And this is also a genre scene. And what you can see in this scene is, again, an innocent young man being completely fooled by these two guys on the right, being kind of like an older, experienced card sharp, and his young apprentice, who looks pretty much just as young as this guy that they're trying to fool. Very clearly, you can see that he has some extra cards tucked behind his back in the belt. And just not only is this scene very playful, but Caravaggio is also able to show different kinds of emotions in the painting. Again, our young man who is being fooled, hasn't realized anything yet and is just really focused on his cards. This guy in the middle is frowning and just trying to stealthily figure out, how to communicate with his young apprentice. What are the cards that he has? And the young apprentice is kind of like looking at his teacher very carefully and just kind of like hoping to get a hint. You wonder whether, because they're the same age, if he feels bad or not. And so there's like a lot going on here in the painting. And you already see something that becomes quite common in the pictures by Caravaggio. Again, quite a plain background. Nothing distracts us from what's going on in the painting. At the same time, it tells us that the details that are in the painting are quite important. And I want to again zoom in on the Google Arts and Culture piece and show you the gloves of one of them, how torn they are. It shows that, they're dressed quite well, but they are not as well off, these guys with their torn gloves. Anyway, so the card sharps and the fortune teller and similar pieces make Caravaggio the most famous artist in Rome. Very soon, he starts working with influential people who end up helping him a lot through the course of his life, because as we already know from the beginning of his career in Milan, Caravaggio is going to get in a lot of trouble, and I will tell you a little bit more about it later. But first, I want to show you one of my favorite pieces by Caravaggio, of course, from the Hermitage Museum, known as the Lute Player. Zoom in to this painting to show it closer. So around that time, Caravaggio works for quite an influential cardinal, whose name is Cardinal Del Monte, who was a true patron of art. He moves in to the cardinal's residence, where he's provided not only with a salary, but also with food and just absolutely wonderful leisure. There are lots of musicians, there is a lot of great art, and it's around that period when Caravaggio starts painting pictures of different musicians, just like this one, known as the Lute Player. And one thing that, as a former Hermitage guide, I always tell my guests that this is a very sensual painting, in a sense that it's supposed to engage all of your senses. And you can say that about a lot of Caravaggio's pieces, but this one, I guess I might add, engages all of your senses in a very pleasant way. Promising all the kinds of pleasures. For example, beautiful fruit in the bottom left corner, and nothing there is rotten here in this painting. Promise something that tastes really good. The flowers right above it sweet smells. Of course, that there are musical instruments here that promise something that is good for your hearing. And when it comes to touch, this is the textures of everything, the textures of the fabric, the fruit, the wooden musical instruments, and the very volumed way, I must say, that some of the objects in the painting are almost sticking out. When you see this painting in real life, it really does feel like the lute, the end of the lute is coming out of the painting. But why is it an invitation to enjoy all of these senses? Well, the lute player is playing the lute, but there are two musical instruments in the painting, and the violin is supposed to be for us. In fact, we know for sure that the notes, the music that is in front of this boy is a love sonnet. And the Hermitage Museum even was able to play this music, and it's absolutely wonderful. When I share the recording of this tour with you soon, I will also include this video. And it's, as I said, absolutely lovely. If you don't want to wait, you can Google, you can go on YouTube and search Caravaggio Hermitage music. You will find it. But it is absolutely lovely. And you can read this painting in many different ways. It could be a hope for love, an invitation for love, or maybe a tale of love that didn't find any response, as the love song that is in front of the boy is a sad kind of song. But the paintings that we just discussed make Caravaggio popular with, as I said, the elite of Rome, cardinals, wealthy aristocrats, and so on. But truly to become the most famous artist in Rome, he had to create something for the public. And as I said, Rome, of course, is the epicenter of the Catholic Church. To become truly known to everybody, you had to create something for the church. And such a request comes very quickly for a chapel, Contarelli Chapel, in Rome. Caravaggio is supposed to create pieces based on the life of Saint Matthew. In particular, the calling of Saint Matthew and the martyrdom of Saint Matthew. And even though Caravaggio eagerly takes on this assignment, we know for sure that it takes him a very, very long time to figure out how he wants to depict these events, especially when it comes to the martyrdom of Saint Matthew. He is not sure how exactly he wants to depict it. As he couldn't figure it out, he decided to, fully focus on the calling of Saint Matthew, and the inspiration came from, again, the same source as before, from the life around him. The Calling of Saint Matthew is one of the most famous pieces by Caravaggio, and you might have seen it before. It is known for many different reasons, but primarily because of its low life setting. We can see that the action here takes place in a tavern, and it's not just a tavern. It's, like the dive bars of today. There's absolutely no decor on the walls. Again, there are very shabby paper shades on the walls, so it's a very dark place. We just by the clothes and just generally by the looks of the people, here in the tavern, we might even recognize the same characters as the people in the card shops as well. And as you know, he was a tax collector that got called, and that was called to follow Jesus. But the way that Caravaggio arranges light here in the painting shows us almost none of Jesus and a lot of Saint Matthew. What we see of Jesus is this stretched out hand that is calling him. And I think for me, just like for many of us, also might remind of the hand of God from the pieces by Michelangelo and the creation of Adam, right? But while in Michelangelo's pieces, they kind of reach towards each other, the gesture in Jesus's hand, that is beautifully highlighted here, is, rhymed by St. Matthew's hand that is pointing at himself in this gesture that says, who, me? You mean me? Are you sure you're calling me? And the light that shines onto his face transforms him from a sinner to a saint, a follower of Jesus. This is an incredible event, a very important event in the religious history. But you cannot say that from the setting of this painting. This seems just absolutely mundane here when you look at this piece. Both Saint Matthew and two boys in front of him look at Jesus and his company in disbelief, while there are two more people here at the table that are not even noticing what is happening. This guy, they look like they're counting money, and the person in the front left looks even a little bit drunk to me as well. It's just very, very tired. And in this mundane setting, such a beautiful event is happening. What an incredible painting. And then this is the piece that gives Caravaggio inspiration for creating the martyrdom of Saint Matthew. Again, he thinks of this as something that he might have seen in the life around him. As what's most likely happened was Saint Matthew was assassinated for speaking out against how do I phrase it right? There was a man who wanted him to persuade a woman who was technically a nun to marry him, and Saint Matthew spoke out against him, for which he got attacked and died. And so for Caravaggio, that reminded him of just an assault on a dark Roman street, which is what's happening here. And I remember when I first looked at that painting, and honestly, from time to time, when I look at it after having seen it for a while, it takes me a second to even find Saint Matthew here, because he's not front and center in the painting. Here he is in the bottom. And the person at the front and center is the sinner and this naked assassin that is in the light. And Caravaggio like really breaks the rules here, because when the art that we're used to often would put the good in the light and the bad in the dark. And here he reverses it. And then he adds all these different people who have mixed emotions about what is happening right now, kind of like, again, maybe on a busy street in Rome. Of course, one of the facial expressions that attracted attention first is this boy who is, I think, crying for help. He's screaming in horror. You might say some people are staring at what's going on some people are trying to hide, and there is a group of people in the back trying to run away. And it's believed that Caravaggio again depicted himself trying to run away from the scene. And if I may, I want to first show you what this looks like in real life in the Cantarelli Chapel, because this is quite quite a small space. And you see the calling of St. Matthew on one wall, the martyrdom of St. Matthew on the opposite wall. And while you are quite enclosed in the space, at the same time, the way chapels are organized reminds you of a theater in a way, that you are witnessing a scene in the theater. And if I may just add a quick story from my personal life, Caravaggio is one of the artists that I like, one of the many. However, for my husband, I would say this is his number one most favorite artist. And a couple years into our relationship, we traveled to Rome, and as a fan of Caravaggio, he was willing to walk to all of these squares and all of these churches just for one painting. And I was, of course, absolutely excited and wanted to see it all. However, our family was sort of like dragging behind, and come on, another Caravaggio painting, really? And this is how I understood, as they say these days, this is my person, because he wanted to see all of these pieces, and so did I. In fact, he was one of the first people who told me a lot about Caravaggio many, many years ago. And for the first time, I saw these paintings in real life with my husband, which is absolutely lovely and connected with a personal event for me. Anyways, I do want to show you a couple more pieces from that period, the Roman period, the pieces that he created not for the church, but for, again, the cultural elite of Rome. This one, Boy Bitten by a Lizard, there's so many stories about it and so many ways to read this painting. But in general, a boy, especially such a young one, like in the painting, with his kind of like chubby cheeks, perfect pale skin, pursed lips, this is a picture of innocence. He's just reaching his hand to get some fruit, and he's bitten by a lizard. And this one is as close to mannerism as can be, because he has this dainty gesture, but it is also kind of an expression of shock and fear, and there's just so much movement in here. There's so much going on in the painting. Some art historians believe that there are sexual connotations to this painting, and a lizard biting a finger could symbolize a veneric disease, which in turn also is, a way of losing your innocence too. So there are lots of interesting stories behind this painting. Again, I recommend a book called The Power of Art by Simon Schama. It has really interesting chapters on different great artists, including Caravaggio, Rembrandt, Van Gogh, and more. And if you don't want to read it, there is also a show available on YouTube with Simon Schama himself telling all of these stories. But, as a person who appreciates art, for me, it was interesting to read that what this would take for an artist and for a model. Because imagine posing like this for an artist, and posing with this facial expression of shock and fear for a long time. Quite interesting. And at that time, later in life, Caravaggio created a lot of pieces from his imagination. But this one was not. This was all from a model. And it just reminds me of this piece, Medusa, which is a self-portrait of Caravaggio. And again, imagine holding this facial expression. for a long time. Also quite interesting. You can see a severed head, which is a theme that will appear in Caravaggio's art for quite a while after, right around this period. I will tell you soon why. But I also want to show you a piece by a different artist, another one I love so much, and just another great illustration of a dedicated artist who would pose like this for a long time for himself, for a self-portrait, is Gian Lorenzo Bernini, who, as you can see with dates, this was created only a year later, and this was the beginning of Bernini's career. And this is a sculpture. This is not even a painting, so it takes a lot more skill. Then this is called a self-portrait as a damned soul, and he held this expression. And what, just to show how dedicated Bernini was, he burned his hand repeatedly with a candle and looked at himself in the mirror as he was screaming in pain to create this sculptural self-portrait, which I think is quite remarkable. But Caravaggio's religious studies also continue, and you might remember how when we were talking about the lute player, I said this one engages your senses in a pleasant way. Well, this one engages them in an opposite way, because this painting depicts Saint Thomas, who asked Jesus for proof of his resurrection, literally sticking his dirty finger inside Jesus's wound. So he believes because he has seen it, and not only seen it, but he also felt it. And interestingly enough, in this painting, Jesus is guiding St. Thomas's hand, his finger, straight into the wound. And this is depicted so incredibly realistically. And again, St. Thomas, too, is a man of the streets. Caravaggio dresses him in peasant robes. You can see the shoulder here is torn, and again, these filthy fingernails. Look at that. Can you imagine sticking it into the wound? And I just flinch every time I look at that wound. And again, Caravaggio is able to engage our senses. On one hand, you almost like feel it in your torso, getting stabbed with a finger, and then it's that icky feeling of dirt, because of the fingernails, the darkness of the background. Yet this is a depiction of Jesus Christ. Isn't that incredible? Another religious painting that really shook people is this one called The Death of the Virgin. And it was revolutionary or scandalous, I must say, in many different ways, but primarily because in the religious tradition and in the in the artistic tradition, the way that the death of the Virgin was often depicted was not like any mere mortal's death. In fact, often that was called the Assumption of the Virgin, and instead of dying, she's often depicted just kind of like being called into the sky and rising into the sky. Some other artists would depict her maybe sitting in bed while people around her are saying goodbye to her. But Caravaggio, again, inspired by the life around him, just depicts a corpse. But the beauty in the painting comes not from this dead woman and her corpse. It comes from the people that are surrounding her and the pure sorrow that you can see in just their bodies and their poses. The figure in the very front of the painting, this is sort of like the encyclopedic depiction of sorrow in art. You will often see that in other artists' pictures. Van Gogh has kind of a similar picture of sort of a man is sitting in the chair like this with their head put down. There are people crying right above the Virgin's bodies, and this adds incredible realness to the piece. It's the sensation of realizing that somebody who you love and who's so important to you is no longer there, and just literally witnessing mortality, not just of the people you care about, but your own, in a way. And it's a very desperate painting, and just all these people crowded in a room around her, which, yeah, maybe showing Virgin Mary raising into the sky shows her divine nature, but it certainly doesn't show the sorrow of the people around her. This painting was commissioned for a church, and this is sort of like a classic art history story. You know, it was commissioned by the church, and then when Caravaggio created it, the people in the church didn't like it and returned it, which made Caravaggio really mad. And in turn, they commissioned a similar painting from one of Caravaggio's followers, who then depicted Virgin Mary sitting in bed, in the like sick and dying, which they also didn't like, and they also returned. And finally, the third commission that they had, you know, showed the classic death of Virgin Mary rising into the sky, and they were satisfied with this. But there's a lot more scandalous about the situation with the Virgin Mary. First of all, a small detail, but her bare feet, bare ankles. This was not the way to depict Virgin Mary. And finally, the nature of the model. Now, there are different sources say different things, but most of them agree that the model for Virgin Mary was a prostitute. Very, very normal for Caravaggio. But there is also a source that this is an actual dead body of a prostitute that had drowned, and Caravaggio arranged to use her corpse for the painting. Can you believe a dead prostitute to model for Virgin Mary? Of course, this is all quite scandalous. And as I started saying, you know, Caravaggio, he was quite a scandalous artist. And you could see that not only in his paintings, but also largely in his private life. Contemporaries say that, you know, for about a fortnight, he would stay in his workshop and focus mostly on his art. And then for a month or so, he would just, you know, walk around the neighborhood, swaying his sword and getting into all sorts of trouble. And he was sued many times for multiple reasons, from small misdemeanors, like, for example, throwing a plate of artichokes into a waiter's face, or writing offensive poems about a fellow artist, or he was sued for actually hurting other people, getting in fights, injuring other people. He had a duel with another artist, and finally he was sued for murder. Most likely, the murder and the conflict in general happened over a mutual lover and a model. But nevertheless, though in the previous situations, the powerful patrons that Caravaggio had were able to protect him, or at least lessen the sentences that he was given. For example, put him under house arrest instead of being put to jail, things like that. For this one, the person who he killed also had a very powerful family, and Caravaggio was not able to his patrons were not able to protect him, and so there was an open bounty for his head, which meant that anybody who saw him could behead him, and get the reward for it. And Caravaggio flees from Rome to Naples, where he still keeps creating wonderful masterpieces. And after being the most famous painter in Rome, he becomes the most famous painter in Naples. But even in Naples, he doesn't stay very long. It's believed that he might have been tormented by, you can tell he was a deeply religious person because he created works like that. And he might have had worries of what would happen to his eternal soul after the murder and many other things. And as a solution, again, with the help of some of his powerful patrons, he decides to go to Malta and become a member of the Knight Order of St. John. And there he also creates a beautiful masterpieces. This one is called The Beheading of St. John, and it is still located in, sorry, let me move this over here. It is still located in St. John's Cathedral in Malta. And again, it is inspired by a scene from real life. Again, most likely St. John the Baptist was arrested and then executed. And so the setting of this piece is either right outside a prison or maybe in a prison yard. And, not, we will talk about this scene in a second, but to see these two prisoners just looking at what's going on, I know, it gives me the chills here. We can see also at the forefront of the painting and really highlighted with the light, kind of similar to the martyrdom of Saint Matthew here, are the executioners. The man in the middle is either a police officer or a prison guard, and all he has to do is really point his finger as if giving an order for these atrocities to start happening. This woman, whose beautiful pale arms are highlighted here, is holding a ball onto which his head is going to be placed. And finally, again, this gorgeous nude, this naked assassin, again, just like in the martyrdom of St. Matthew, is just about, is in the process of beheading. It does feel like, this action is lasting forever, because we're in the middle of what's going on. She is just still moving the ball. He's hiding the knife behind his back as if maybe he's about to swing it again at him. But there's another very interesting detail here. Caravaggio wrote his own name. He signed the painting. He signed his name with St. John's blood. And for a really long time, I couldn't understand the meaning of it. Like, why did he do it? It couldn't be just because he wanted to be so scandalous. And again, it was in Simon Schama's book that I read that this was a way, he was really tormented by his past and his aggressive nature. And maybe this was a way of the blood of a saint to wash away the sins of this sinner, Caravaggio. Again, he was a deeply religious person. Okay. We're nearing the end. Just a lot of the beheadings in the paintings. I told you that would happen. And again, this is has a lot to do with the the open bounty for his head. Something tells me he saw visions of his beheading in his sleep, and in his dreams. And I kind of, the quintessential depiction of that, outside of the Medusa that we saw earlier, is this one, David with the head of Goliath. And the head of Goliath being the self-portrait of Caravaggio, with blood just oozing out of his head. By the time he created this piece, he was already back in Italy. Believe it or not, he assaulted one of the brothers of the Order of St. John and had to flee. And the Borghese family became his new patrons, and they were able to arrange a pardon for him. So he could be in Italy safely again. And so he created this painting, and he created it for the Borghese family. And this is believed to be one of the last pieces created by Caravaggio, most likely second to last. And when he was on his way to the Borghese family with some of the pieces, he died. And of course, there are lots of mysteries about his death as well. Some people believe he was assassinated, probably by the family of that knight in Malta that he attacked. Some people believe that he died of a veneric disease. Some people believe it was a more innocent disease, so to say. But again, he died in a scandalous way, just like sort of the rest of his life was. And he depicts himself as a sinner and a sufferer in this piece, which I find quite interesting. I saw that I got a couple comments in the chat that I will check on, and then feel free to put questions if you have any, and after that I'll let you know how we can stay in touch in the future. Okay. Ooh, I got a really awesome comment from Elaine saying that the Carp Sharps and Martha and Mary Magdalene are both on loan at the Art Institute of Chicago until mid-December. So if you find yourself in the area, go and check them out. Thank you so much for your wonderful comment, Pat, as well. Thank you. I appreciate you letting me talk to you about art and share some of the personal stories. And, as I said in the beginning, I love doing this, but unfortunately, parenthood, being in the trenches of it right now, and I can already tell it's only October. It's gonna be a really stressful school year for me. So I won't be able to just put as much energy and effort and love into doing these every month and producing a new one every month. But I do have a couple bookings from libraries already for something that I haven't done for you yet, but they are all for the same tour. My tour is going to be Soviet art, official and underground. So it's going to be, yeah, right? I thought that's pretty cool. So I'm going to talk about what's known as, the Soviet realism, what was, the allowed and encouraged art in the Soviet Union, which I think a lot of it is also pretty cool to talk about, and how the ideology affected that art. And then the avant-garde art, so cool, and the avant-garde art of the 20th century. So I'll talk about that. And so can we offer a booking of a program that you have already done for us at your convenience? Yes, of course. Feel free to reach out to me. And speaking of booking, you should all have my personal email address, because I'm not doing these monthly tours anymore. It's not gonna make sense for me to pay for an email newsletter because that costs money. What I will do is next week I'm going to send out sort of like the last newsletter in a similar format that I have been sending. And when it comes still comes from my personal email address. And you are the people who always open my emails. So you are if I send out a personal email to you, you're very likely to just receive it and it will be fine. But just in case, you can add me to contacts in your email. That way, if I ever send out, say, oh, I'm doing a tour for a library next week, you will get it. So my plan in the future is not to send out those emails through an email sender, but send them personally to you. And you should, 99% get them, because again, you open my emails. It's people who don't really open, they might go to spam. But if you add me to your email addresses, email contacts, you should be getting those messages from me. So I will still be inviting you to those, and they still will be free for you. They just won't be like regularly new every month. So, but again, I will share that at some point next week in like sort of like the last newsletter, together with the recording of this one and the music that was produced by the Hermitage for one of the Caravaggio's paintings. That's a very cool video and is worth seeing. And if anything changes, if life becomes a little bit easier, or if there's anything new, I will definitely let you know. But it would be probably via a personal email. So yeah, yes, thank you so much, everybody, again. Thank you. Thank you. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and let's stay in touch one way or another. Okay. All right. Bye, everybody.